morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is a funny story. This little cartoon is depicting the South African elections 2024. Apparently, there were reports that somebody had invited Zanu PF to witness those elections. But many of the participants in those South African elections protested. They were not happy, given Zanu PF's reputation of rigging elections. And this story illustrates it beautifully. In the childhood story of the hares, the rabbits, if you want, they did not want the baboon to join them in their feasting. And so they bent the grass all around where they were going to have their feast. And then they knew that the baboon would know they were having a feast. And so he would try to get crushed. And of course, baboons move on all four. And so when they arrive at the party, they will have their hands dirty. And so they will be told, no, you have got to go back and wash your hands. And this is exactly what this little story is illustrating. So in this particular case, the baboon arrives, and we can tell must be Zanu PF from the trademark scarf. And the election commissioner in South Africa duly sends them back to wash their hands. This is what happens when you've earned yourself a bad reputation. Zanu PF blatantly rigged the 2023 elections. And unlike in the past, when SADC and AU had turned a blind eye to it, last year, both SADC and the AU condemned those elections. And the report was very clear. Those elections were not free, fair, and credible, period. And we can just have a quick review of the report given by, or rather, an update given by Dr. Mumba on the very issue.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, let me be clear that the changing of any dynamic or situation in any of our African countries is a preserve of the citizens of that country, in this case, the Zimbabwean people. An election observation team goes there to support the process by observing and being able to release a statement of our observations that, for instance, in Zimbabwe, we raised several issues of transparency and also the independence of the Electoral Commission and things which happen in many other countries, But at the end of the day, once we produce the report and make it available to the Zimbabwean authorities and eventually to the Zimbabwean people, it really remains the preserve of the Zimbabwean people to fight for the freedoms that they need themselves and to correct those issues that have been observed. The reason why we have multiple observation missions is to ensure that, there is a comparison, taking place between the SADC report and the European Union report, the African Union report. And then they can see that those issues that repeat themselves in all these reports, it's up to the Zimbabwean people. And this is where I appeal to all political leaders, not only in Zimbabwe, especially the elections that are coming in Mozambique, they're coming in South Africa, in DRC. We have to make up our minds that, look, at the end of the day, once the people in the country are given an opportunity to monitor the elections, because they also monitor. It starts not during the day of the elections. They must make sure that the constitutional lacunas that can affect a good election are dealt with months before the election. And they must fight to ensure that there's a level playing field. They should never wait for the time when the election is taking place. They must also insist that the electoral commissions and the governments in those countries abide by international norms in holding democratic elections. And this fight must be more vicious before the election comes.
Well, in South Africa, it was vicious. They didn't want Zanu PF to observe their elections. If Zanu PF could bribe Dr. Mumba and his group to rewrite that report, I'm sure they would do that. Because, make no mistake about it, Zanu PF's reputation has been damaged, seriously damaged. And they've carried that damaged reputation everywhere they go. So when in South Africa they were invited to observe those elections, some of the participants in South Africa protested that how can you invite somebody who has got a reputation of rigging elections? And admittedly, officials there must have realized that this was a valid point, because SADC itself has endorsed that report as elections not being free, fair, and credible. So that reputation cannot be denied. And so now that reputation is following Zanu PF like its shadow. Worse still, I think it's following Zanu PF like a sting, a skunk. The smell lingers for days. Because South Africans, although Zanu PF has been told they could not participate, they're still talking about it, and rightly so too. The first cartoon showed the rabbit, the IEC rabbit, saying, "Go back and wash your hands." The second cartoon is saying, "And take your zig bag. Actually, don't come back." In the first cartoon, the second baboon didn't have anything. But in this second one, the second baboon is carrying a bag, 2 bags in fact, with zig on it. So Zanu PF's reputation of bribing officials is what is being depicted there. And Rabbit is making it very clear he's not interested in the bribe. And this time, do not come back. And rightly so too. Zanu PF has been rigging elections for the last 44 years. And I totally agree with Dr. Mumba in that video clip when he said the people of Zimbabwe, or anywhere in SADC, it is their responsibility to fight for free, fair, and credible elections. Not to wait until a few months before the election, but to start straight away. SADC's report on Zimbabwe's 2023 elections is our starting point. The report itself makes it very clear. The election failed to meet Zimbabwe's own electoral laws. For instance, one of the electoral law requirements is that the Election Supervision Commission, ZEC, should produce a verified voters' roll at least 1 calendar month before nomination day. That did not produce a verified voters' roll a month before nomination day. It didn't produce it even for nomination day. Indeed, it never produced a verified voters' roll, period. And this is a historic fact. Zimbabwe, ever since our independence, has never produced a verified voters' roll, which all the participants could look at and say, yeah, that's okay. Never. And so this has become one of the tools Zanu PF has used to rig elections. Before the 2023 elections, a group, Team Pachedu, had managed to get some copies of the voters' roll that was available. And they had done an analysis on it. And some of the mistakes they found were unbelievable. They found people's names being moved around from one polling station to another. The voter himself has never requested it. In some cases, a family, husband and wife, who definitely live on the same address, they'll find the husband is in one polling station, the wife in another. Why? In some cases, the polling stations will be in another constituency. And those are the lucky ones. Some of the people found their names had been deleted from the voters' roll. And when ZEC was asked to look into those problems, he never bothered. And this is where even our opposition has got to be called into question. Why did they insist in participating in such flawed, blatantly flawed elections? Yet they did. This is where Chamisa came in and started talking about, I have plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Chamisa, Triple C is going to win big, he claimed. God is in it, he said. Of course, he was lying. The thing about Zimbabwe's opposition, which most Zimbabweans have been slow to accept, is that the opposition has been working in cahoots with the ruling party, Zanu PF. They had the golden opportunity to implement the democratic reforms. They failed to implement even one reform in 5 years of the GNU. And ever since the GNU debacle, the opposition have participated in flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, knowing fully well that by participating, they were giving Zanu PF legitimacy. But they continue to participate. Why? Greed. They also knew that Zanu PF would be awarding any of the opposition who participate with a few gravitron seats. And that is all they wanted. The few gravitron seats. Even when the SADC report came out condemning the 2023 elections, the AU condemned the 2023 elections. Triple C leaders disregarded all that and still went ahead and accepted the few gravitary seats that they'd won, and even publicly defended that position, claiming that in all areas where the opposition had won, those were liberated zones. The elections in those areas were free, fair, and credible. Again, that was nonsense. As I said earlier, ZEC had failed to produce a verified voters' roll, a nationwide verified voters' roll. There was no verified voters' roll even in those areas that the opposition won the seats. So on what basis were they claiming that those were liberated zones? Zanu PF has been very careful to make sure that it allowed the opposition to win a few seats to entice them to keep on participating. And Chamisa was absolutely hell-bent on participating in those elections. He went even to the extent of conning his own followers into participating, assuring them that he was going to win. He had plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes. When in the end, not only did he not have a verified voters' roll, he did not even deploy the election agencies at the polling stations, even when he had the money to do so. He knew Zanu PF was rigging those elections. He knew Triple C was not going to win any, but only a few seats. And that is all he cared about. The irony is, no sooner had the opposition claimed those few gravitary seats that they started fighting among themselves for those seats. As soon as the results were declared, a few days later, no doubt that Savangu had already had the plan, knew exactly what he was going to do. He started recalling those elected Triple C officials. In some cases, the recall resulted in the by-elections, which neither the Savangu faction nor Chamisa faction could hang on to those seats. Zanu PF ended up winning those seats, giving Zanu PF a supermajority in parliament. But he was not after those seats. He was after those seats, the proportional representation seats. There are a few proportional representation seats in parliament, and all the senatorial seats are proportional representation, other than those for the chiefs and a few others. And Savangu himself ended up nominating himself as one of the senators. The opposition has been participating in these flawed elections for the sake of the few gravitary seats that were being offered. That is the truth. Some people refuse to accept it, but that doesn't change the reality on the ground. That is the truth. Whether we like to accept it or not, the opposition in Zimbabwe is nothing more than Zanu PF Team B. They've been participating in these elections to give Team A electoral victory and to make sure that by participating, they give the process credibility and thus give Team A legitimacy. And that is exactly what has been happening here. This is a quotation from David Coulter's book, stating exactly those things. Well, Zanu PF has managed to bribe not only election of officials in Zimbabwe, but even the opposition. They are now in the regime's deep pockets. It is pleasing to note that the regime has failed to do the same in SADC. South Africans are going to the polls on the 29th of May. That's in about 2 weeks. And what we have seen happen in South Africa is something that South Africans themselves must be proud of. People like me, SADC members, observing from outside, are proud of. There has not been any election violence in South Africa. There has not been any reports of trying to rig the elections. And even if ANC was to lose, I think it will be honorable for them to accept defeat honorably, hard as that may be, in the full knowledge that they did deliver their constitutional obligation to the people of South Africa. Free, fair, and credible elections. Particularly when you're talking of a region that is not renowned for holding free, fair, and credible elections. Admittedly, South Africa, the last 30 years, they have managed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. And long may that continue. As for our friends, the Zanu PF, I think it is important to underline that they did rig the 2023 elections. Per se, the regime is illegitimate. Zimbabwe's economic development is now being held back because we've got a pariah state. By rigging the elections, Zanu PF confirmed that Zimbabwe is still a pariah state. The last few weeks, Mnangagwa has been running around, preparing the venue and cleaning up the capital city, Harare, in preparation for the SADC summit in August. I think he is trying desperately to present himself as a statesman. But the world, and SADC in particular, will know that he rigged the 2023 elections and he is illegitimate. It is a pity that SADC had failed to make that decisive decision to deny him political legitimacy outright. He's going to be allowed to be the SADC chairperson for a year. I can't think of anyone less deserving to be SADC chairperson. It will only give confidence to those countries in SADC who will be holding their elections between August this year and August next year. They can now do it with confidence, knowing fully well that the SADC chairperson is himself illegitimate and is not likely to allow any election observer to condemn an equally illegitimate election process. Still, we must do our best to remind Mnangagwa at every turn that he is illegitimate. That wherever he goes when we're talking of elections, the fact that he rigged the 2023 elections follows him everywhere. The people of Zimbabwe have to fight for free, fair, and credible election in 2028, and the fight must start right now, as Dr. Mumba tried to explain in that clip. We should not wait for a few years before the elections. We should do so straight away. We should make it very clear that 2028 elections cannot go ahead without meaningful democratic reforms implemented to make sure that the elections are free, fair, and credible. We should make sure that the opposition should not sell out again and participate in flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy out of greed. That would be a hard sell because those guys are greedy. They're not going to listen. It will also be equally a hard sell to tell their followers who are ignorant, naive, and gullible not to participate. They were fooled in 2018, assured that the MDC alliance was going to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. But as we know, Zanu PF blatantly rigged those elections. The MDC had never even questioned Chamisa. And as we know, last year he came up with another equally idiotic claim that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. They will do the same again in 2028. All we can do is try to hammer in the message of the sheer futility of participating in these flawed elections only to give Zanu PF legitimacy. It's going to be a long fight because some of these people, this Chamisa Chete brigade, they don't listen to reason. If they were easily conned in 2018 and then again 2023, I think that is a sign that we are dealing with some people who simply would not listen to reason. But so be it. That is the challenge that we have got to deal with. In 2028, if Zanu PF rigs the elections and get away with it, it will be a disaster for the country. This is something that we should have stopped a long time ago. And to have 44 years and we're still having rigged elections is unforgivable. We have got to make sure that history does not repeat itself in 2028. That is the challenge that I leave all my fellow Zimbabweans out there. Thank you very much for listening and have a good night.